start to share on one of the biggest chidushim of the Alter Rebbe in the Chasnide is found in Siman Kuf Pei Daled, which we learned the past few days. And that is about Vesses HaFlogah. We know it's different kinds of Vestes, different times when calculations, how to know when the blood is going to come. When the person has to separate, a man and a woman cannot be together during the oina, the time when the blood is supposed to come. And there's a definition when that blood is supposed to come. It's called there's a Flogah, Chedesh, Oina Beinanis, different ways of calculating. The three more common ones, different ways of calculating them. Person has a Vesses Kavua, they only have one date a month. If they don't have Vesses Kavua, we'll get to that at a different time. How does a Vesses Kavua become? When you have three of the same in a row. She sees on Beis Kislev, Beis Tevis, Beis Shuchat, 3 times in a row on Beis, so Vesses Kavua for Beis. If she sees at let's say if it's 28 days, 27 days, 26 days, 25 days, goes down, it's also Vesses Kavua. There's different ways of calculating. The point is, if you have a pattern that repeats itself 3 times, it becomes Vesses Kavua, like you have a Shiur Nagach. So it comes from a Shiur Tam to a Shiur Mud, takes 3 times, 3 intervals. One of these Vestes is called the Vesses HaFlogah. The Vesses HaChodesh, Vesses, it means the date of the month, the amount of days is based on Tchilas Re'iyah, on the first day. You calculate from the first day of the flow to the first day of the flow, and then you go through that. However, there's something called the Vesses HaFlogah. Vesses HaFlogah is how many oinas in between one flow and the next flow. The majority of the world paskins that Vesses HaFlogah you calculate from the beginning of the flow to the beginning of the flow. That means if she saw on Beis Kislev daytime, you count the days, yeah. You go from we do oinus because it's yeah. They go the Flogah, they count how many days there are between the first one and the first time that she sees the blood again, and that's the rest of Flogah. Alter Rebbe comes with a Chiddush, and the Alter Rebbe does not say, what? Days. What's the Flogah? No, it's always the oina when you see the blood. It's always the oina when you see the blood.
So what's the day calculation?
They count days for a Flogah, so if there'll be 28 days, 27 days, from Tchila to Tchila, 27 days from Tchila to Tchila.
And
right?
not. And not.
We don't count from beginning to beginning. We count from
If you do oinus, then you can have sometimes by night. But
what?
It's always by the same oinus.
No, it's the same. If you see it by, I'll explain in a second. Yeah, I'll explain. There's 2 things. This is I explained it in a previous last year. I gave a Kuf Pei Daled. There is Prisha and there is Bdika. Prisha is a time that when you're supposed to separate from when the woman is supposed to separate from her husband. The Oinas Prisha, the time of the day, whether it's the Oina of the night or the Oina of the day, you have to separate, the wife is separate from the husband. That depends on when the flow started. That means if the flow started at day, then the oina prisha is going to be at day. If the flow started at night, then the prisha is going to be at night. Right? So if you have a Veses HaChodesh that she saw on Aleph, on Beis Kislev by day, she'll have to separate Beis Teves by day. In Veld, how do they count the Aflagas? They would count how many days is between Beis and Beis. Right? So you have, depends if Kislev is a mother or Chaser, 20 and 30 days in between. And then you take those 30 days, move them from Beis Teves weiter, and then again, 30 days later, 29, 30 days later, you will have the time, the oina. Let's say she saw during the day. So that day, during the day, oina, she has to separate.
What's the difference if we count days or oinas?
We'll get to that in a second. Alter Rebbe comes, and Alter Rebbe says that it's clear that you count haflagas from the end, means from when she stops bleeding, she checks and she stops bleeding, until when she starts bleeding again. This is what we're going to explain today. So you count oinas. What do you mean count oinas? You count, each day is 2 oinas. There's morning oina and the night oina. So you count, let's say, so it's always going to be that she's going to, today, the way we do it today, that the Hefsek Tara is done daytime, so the first oina that you're going to count for haflaga is always going to be a nighttime oina. Lu Yitzur, a woman did a bdika at night and determined that it stopped. So maybe the oina will start in the day. But the way we do it today, the way we do it today is always the bdikas are done because connect to Hefsek Tara. Hefsek Tara is during the day. That night is oina number 1. No. Once you check and you determine there's no blood, that starts from there. Yeah. And you count. So then the next, so that if it would be daytime, you count how many oinas pass that she doesn't see any blood. So it's 10 days, will be 20 oinas. If it's 10 and a half days, it'll be 21 oinas. If it's 15 days, it'll be 30 oinas. It could be 32 oinas, 31 oinas. So now, what happens? We count oinas. So 31 oinas are counted, and it might happen that you saw the blood in a night oina, but because the calculation is 31, the next time when you're going to add them up, you're going to end up doing the bdika in a day oina, not in a night oina. It's an uneven number. If it's the same number, you'll end up doing it at the same time. If it's an uneven number, you'll do it a different oina. That's the big difference between us and them. So I want to go through this topic from the Alter Rebbe, understand what the Alter Rebbe says, why the Alter Rebbe says it, and the certain questions that people ask on the Alter Rebbe, and why these questions, most of them, don't apply. The halacha is on Seif Vav in the Shulchan Aruch. We know where it says in Seif Hey, if she sees a very short period, starts before nets, ends after nets, she only is chayshish. She has to wait. She has to be chayshish for the oina when it started, the night oina. But also she has to wait until after the time when the previous period ended into the day oina. That's a short period. If it's a longer period, 2-3 days, that she's bleeding, then she's only chayshish the oina when it started. That's what Shulchan Aruch says. Comes Alter Rebbe and says, and this enough. Then once the Shulchan Aruch says, once that oina passes, when she starts seeing blood during the night, so then the next month she's going to check at that night, same night, and if the whole night passes and there is no blood, then she's mutter. She doesn't have to wait 2 full days, the whole sh'as haveses. So Alter Rebbe right away explains why is that so. Sifkat Mechav Beis, the boss at Chilas haveses as linon. Why? Because we go after the beginning the onset of the flow, beginning of the flow. ואין לעשר שאר האונס משום שעשה וסס עצמוי, כמו ברויה ראיו מרובה כהן ניצחם עד אחר ניצחם. And you don't want to say that the rest of the oinus, let's say it was a 72-hour period, so you're not going to say that in addition to the first oinus when it started, the other additional 5 oinus are also have to be aser. And it's not the same, you don't say it's aser, and it's not the same like it says in the previous siman about a re'iyah, which started before nets and ended after nets. Because over there, the Hasam Gabadav Moshe Nimshach Bayayim, Svarahu Lias Nechshav Kollel Re'iyah Achas Meruba. Over there, when you have a relatively small period, it started at night and ended at the day, so we count that the additional, 20 minutes, half hour that came after nets is all part of the same main re'iyah which started before. And therefore, you have to be choishesh that just like that it's all, that this is called the beginning of it could be that the vessel is going to come during this period of time. However, Mashenkin Hacha, in this case, when it's 2 or 3 days, it's not all considered one long re'iyah. Let's be clear. It doesn't mean there's different re'iyahs. Jump on it. It means Elo she'ikar re'iyah utchilosa v'ashar hu tesefes damim shenitoisu bo. The beginning of it is ikar re'iyah, and that was during the oina when it started. And the next 5 oinas was tesefes, was additional blood, part of the same re'iyah, but it's not the ikar re'iyah. It's tesefes, it's extra, it's more blood that's connected to the same thing, but it's not the ikar of it. And therefore, you only choishesh to the oina of the ikar. So now the next month comes and you check that day and you see that there was no blood during the first oina, which is the ikar. Once the ikar passed, the first oina passed, and you didn't see blood, tesefes also, you don't say tesefes is going to come without the ikar. If the time of the ikar passed, then for sure it's not going to come during the time of the tesefes. Now comes the part that we're going to discuss about Vesach. Umihu lo yazlina basatchilas haveses elo leinyan prisha sa'oinu. This that we go after tchilas haveses, that we look at when the flow started, applies only to the oinas haprisha, the time that you have to separate, the wife has to separate from her husband. That's when we look at the oina, the tchilas haveses, the beginning of the flow. That if she did not see at that oina when the vessel started. And therefore is when we look at it that if the ikar fell off, if the first, if she didn't see in the ikar, we're not going to see the tesefes either. When it comes to vesses afloga, we don't look at tchilas haveses. Why? Because let's say if there's no nistaleka ikar, if we don't have to go to this idea of that for prisha we need the idea nistaleka ikar, nistaleka tesefes. When it comes to calculating vesses afloga, we don't need that. Le'azlina b'zat tchilas haveses lina vesses afloga l'shar ha'afloga mitchilas re'iyah l'tchilas re'iyah. We do not calculate hafloga from beginning of re'iyah to beginning of re'iyah. We don't count it the amount of time between the beginning of bleeding and the next beginning of bleeding. Why is that? Rather, we go from the end of the bleeding, we calculate from the end of the bleeding until the beginning of the bleeding. Just want to point out something very important. that this, we're going to see in Kudasachim soon, the idea over here is that when it comes to Veses Afloga, and we're going to see in Kudasachim a little bit, and we're going to see it also in other places in Alter, that Veses Afloga, we're counting the time that there is no bleeding. Not how long from beginning to beginning. When we're looking at Veses, when we're looking at Oinas Chashash that you have to separate, that the idea behind it is the woman cannot be with her husband if there's a chashash she's going to see blood at that time. Why is that? Could be it's going to get mixed up. She's going to see blood. Maybe it's going to be Remach Mustache. It's going to be because this. We don't want to get into any problems. And it's also Shaila. It's also with the ice. Also with the Laban. It's a separate discussion. There, we have to see when the flow started, and that is for the purpose of determining when to separate. So therefore, once we determine that oino of separation passed and there was no bleeding over there, so we say the Tosefah is not going to come without the Iker. That passed, which probably she's not going to see the period, this period that was supposed to come, that came last month at this day, is not happening this month. Whatever reason it is. Could be it's going to come 2 days later, could be she's pregnant. We don't know what the situation is, but it's not coming in this day. It passed. But when it comes to Afloge, being that the whole Re'iyah is be'etzem one Re'iyah. It's Re'iyah Achas. It just has Iker and it has Tosefos. We're going to see in Kudasachim soon. There's different shittas. I mean, the Ramban has a shitta that every day is his own Re'iyah. But we look at it as it's, the Alter Rebbe looks at it, it's one Re'iyah. It's one Re'iyah that has Iker and has Tosefos. So when you're going to do Afloga, you're going to go from the end, from after the Tosefos is also over, until the beginning of the next one. And when you have that amount of time of the Afloga, that's when you know what the Afloga is. So essentially, the Afloga is the exact opposite of the other ones. The other ones is determining what's the Chazaka, what's the Kavua, what makes something Kavua. How do you make a Veses Kavua? 3 times that there is blood. Veses Afloga is telling you 3 times that there is no blood. Why is that? You're going to see how the Alter Rebbe understands. So three times. It comes the 4th one is when you're able to determine. You can't determine because you have to have 4 periods to get 3 Aflogas.
It's supposed to be a Prisha between the husband and the wife.
Yeah, only if it's not a kavua. I mean, once it becomes a kavua, you only have one Prisha a month. Or if you have more kavuas, it's more kavuas. We're chayshish to all of them because no kavua.
Why is he saying also that the rest of the is supposed to be a Prisha?
Yeah. But so again, the Tchilas Aveses is only used to determine when to be Pirish, what oina to be Pirish. Veses Afloga, you don't calculate. He says for calculation, you don't calculate from Tchilas Oina. Only for Prisha, you look at Tchilas Oina. To determine when you have to be Pirish, you look at Tchilas Oina. To determine when to be Pirish, you have to look at Tchilas Oina. Because you have to know when the blood is supposed to come. But to determine how long when to look for the Prishas, when to put the Prisha on the calendar, that's when you look at Haflaga, how many days, how many oinas passed clean. Okay, go ahead and he explains what he explains how it is. He saw one flow, one period was 3 days. 20 days passed from the end of this Re'iyah. 3 days, she saw blood. The blood stopped. She knows the blood stopped. She checked the blood stopped, whatever it is. Then 20 more days passed. And then she saw another flow. On the 20 means 23 days passed from the beginning of the Re'iyah. 23 days passed from the beginning of the Re'iyah. And 3 days, then 20 clean days. Then Rasa Beis Yamim. Then she saw 2 days. Then what you do is you take the 20 days because there was 20 days between the end of the Kislev flow and the beginning of the Tevis flow. Now the Tevis flow is only 2 days, not 3 days. So you take those 20 days that you have from the previous month, you move them and you paste them after the end of the flow now, which is only 2 days. Even though it's really only the 22nd day, because you only saw blood for 2 days. Last period you saw blood for 3 days. Over here you saw only 2 days. Still, you start counting the 20 days from then. The Fishinian versus Afloga he Shemafleges Riyosa Lizman Yodua. The concept of versus Afloga is she pushes Mafleges. It goes further away. The Re'iyah Lizman Yodua at a specific time. Ve'eina Roya Besoich Hazman. And she's not going to see during these days of Hafloga. ואם הזמן שמפלגת ונראה בו ישוב וגימל פעם, זה versus קבוע. ופעם אחת זה versus שאין קבוע. If you have three gaps of 20 days, from end to beginning, that means 4 periods. Because the only way to calculate the first ones, from period 1 to period 2, is one afloga. Period 2 to period 3, second afloga. Period 3 to period 4 is a third afloga. So you need 4 periods to determine the versus kavua for afloga. Then it becomes a versus kavua, and if not, it's a versus she'enei kavua. The kevon she'afloga ima she'eina roya, since the hafloga by definition is what you don't see, the amount of time you don't see, ein mechashon Yisrael mesef re'iyah. The only way you count it is misoif re'iyah, from the end, from the time that you end to see the blood. Dahainu mitchilas hanekim shelo, which means when is that? After the hefsek tara, the beginning of the shiva nekim. Oy milel tvilasa. It makes you easier to calculate from leil tvilasa. It's also, it will never be a difference unless you push off mikveh, but then you don't calculate. You don't push off hefsek tara, you don't push off mikveh because you mess up the calendar. Whichever one you use for calculations. Today we already use the same thing. Shakol cheshbon echad. There's always going to be 7 days from hefsek tara to mikveh, unless for whatever reason mikveh has to be pushed off. So whether you calculate oinus from the first night of the shiva nekim or from the first night after mikveh till the flow, you'll end up with the same amount. The next thing, you end up with the same amount of time. It's always,
If you count from the you just count plus 7 days.
No. Then the next month, you're going to take those 12 days, 24 oinus, and paste them after mikveh night. If you count from hefsek tahara to period, then you're going to copy, paste, and paste it after hefsek tahara. If you count from mikveh, you paste it after mikveh.
She sees the middle of the Zion then if it's
Whole separate discussion. What you count, the whole separate discussion when it's counted as the same flow, when it's counted as a different flow.
that would be not community in this case.
What?
If you count from Itanayo from the Asahara, it wouldn't be the same number.
You're actually counting from
You make the Asahara, then it would be counted from that Asahara.
The question is if that's one flow or it's separate flows. It depends how you define that re'iyah middle of the three of the shiva nekim.
Well, the person that counts the real tefillah, in this case, after 7 days, you have the separate flow. What would they count this?
No, the whole thing gets reset anyways, because if you count it as a new flow, then you reset it. You reset everything, huh? It might be no flow, huh?
It was not plugged in, there was no mikvah.
It still counts, because if she stopped, you say, the idea is it's from the time of stopping. He just says about using for mikveh night, just if it makes it easier for you to count. No. What do you mean? If she sees between, if she has a short period right afterwards, yeah, she'll be chayshish next month, yeah. Shorter flow. Not every 3 days. It passes clean, it's done. But yeah, sure there is. Sure, the concepts. You want to know, practically speaking, there's certain people, and certain women start taking certain pills, birth control pills, that play around with their hormones, and they might be able to start a second flow for the first 2 months, 3 days after mikveh. It was every 15 days a flow until the body regulated itself. 2 months, 4 periods in 2 months, 4 or 5 periods in 2.5 months, whatever, until it's stabilized. So she had 3 clean days. 3 clean days a month.
That's if you count from mikvah now. That's if you count.
3 clean days she was able to be with her husband.
Yeah. But you also have.
That means she actually, I think that with the pills, she became a Vesas Kavua for those times because she had such short ones, she was able to be Kaveya 3 times in a row. Very, very
Even
quick.
though it's because of
It's a whole different discussion if it's because it was Rabbi Hamlik you spoke about. No. But Vesas Kavua through pills was Vesas Aguf. You doing into that? Okay. I'll get to it one day. If you Kaveya Vesas.
A bad Vidika during Shabbat would also be a short haflaga. Later on.
Depends how you count what, after 7 days, not, yeah. That's why you see if the first 3 days is different than afterwards. Yeah, the majority of women, again, this is the roiv that I'll tell you mentioned a few places, they have a certain amount of days. It's from when the mayan gets closed, no more blood coming out, until it opens up again in the beginning of the re'iyah. Yeah, now I'm going to stop before I continue weiter, because I want to go into a different Alter Rebbe, which is a little bit clearer what the Aphlage is all about. That is Siman Kuf Pei Zayin Sifkot Mem Aleph. Whereas Alter Rebbe, Kuf Pei Zayin Sifkot Mem Aleph. It's page. We're starting from Tzaddik, page Kuf in this book. Yeah, I'm just going to go. Shemechashvin. He says he mentioned it before. I'll tell you, I already mentioned it before. Shemechashvin versus Haflaga. It's page Kuf in the book. Shemechashvin versus Haflaga misoifri yosa. It's Sifkotim Emal. I'm starting 2 lines into it, so it's in page Kuf in this in the white booklet. Shemechashvin versus Afloga misoifri yosa. I'm not going to open this and enter the whole Alter Rebbe. I just want to point out this line. How do you calculate versus Afloga misoifri yosa from the end of the time she sees sheniksa the tahara midomeha, from the time when she's clean from her bleeding? עד שיסאסף הדם ויסרבה וייצא בבשור השניס כדרך הנשים שיש להן וסס שובו לימי טהרוסן אחר איאז אייס נידוסן. This time between one and the second time, between the end of one bleeding and the beginning of the next bleeding, is a time when the body regenerates the blood that's going to be released at the next period. What is a period? The lining in the uterus cracks, sheds, and blood comes out with it. Not cracks. I'm not English is my third language. Sheds, and it goes and it gets and it comes out with blood. So it takes time. Blood has to accumulate. Blood doesn't just come from nowhere. So comes that time. That's during the time of the Haflaga. That's what happens during Haflaga. The blood accumulates. Blood can't start accumulating when it's still coming out. It accumulates and it's coming out right away. So stops bleeding, starts building up again. Then it comes to the beginning of the next flow. It sheds and it comes out. So that is the Haflaga. The Haflaga is essentially the time that the uterus regenerates the bleeding that's going to come a few weeks later. That is the time of the Haflaga. I can go back to Kuf Pedalad. There's the last words over here. Looks like Ve'af she'anida mayona pasuach kol zayin yimei so comes Alter Rebbe says you're gonna have a big question. Suddenly, Alter Rebbe just says that how do you calculate the flogger from the time that the flow stops until the time the flow begins? We know that nida has 7 days. Shiva nida midera says 7 days that she's there's nida and the zava. Nida has vestus, but the 7 days start from the beginning of the flow. She goes to mikveh the 7th day, regardless of what she bled. Zava, she waits for it to stop, and then she goes to mikveh. Yeah, Shiva suffer. So, if you want to take a flogger, really that flogger should be from the 7th day, not from the end of the bleeding. The end of the bleeding could be the 3rd day. The end of the bleeding could be the 4th day. The end of the bleeding could be the 5th day. The end of the bleeding could be the 6th day. The end of the bleeding could be the 8th day. Yeah. So, but if it's the 8th day, it's a different discussion. If it ends 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th day, 6th day, then how could she start counting? How can you say Mayon Sasum if we know the Gemara says Cheskas Nide Mayon Pasuach? It's open for 7 days. So really, you should count the haflage from the end of the 7th day, and then quite simply, there'll be no difference between Tchilas and Sefer. Because if you always add 7 days, the only difference will be if she sees 8 days. But if we 7 days, you always do the same thing. So he says, Mikol Mokoim Achshav Shitilu Alein Din Zavois Yesh Lohen Din Zavois Af Lazum Shefsiko B'Tahara. Now that we added to them Din Zavois, we added to the woman used to have in the olden days when people knew the difference between Nida and Zava. So Taka, if you have to do a flog, it would be from the end of the 7 days till the beginning of the next one. Yeah? But now that we attach them to Zavas, consider them all like Zavas, which is why we're more machmer with them and everything else, they ended up getting that we count from the end of the bleeding and not from the end of the 7 days. When could it be that's going to be shown? Everybody's going to think right away. Usually, how could you count Vesas Aflaga that could be less than 5 days? Now, the Rebbe mentions 2-3 days. We know, bleeding, you count 5 days, then you do the Hefzik, right? If you have a new flow during Shiva Nakiyim, you don't have to wait 5 days. Waiting 5 days is because of a different reason, not because of the bleeding. Waiting 5 days has to do with the Tumah of Pilatus. We're not sure how you count the 3 days, so we added on each end, just in case they're not going to get it right. But if she sees during a time when she's anyways not with her husband, because she's not tahir, so if she sees a small period, the 5th day of Shiva Nakiyim, she has a small period, which is 1 day, a day, or half a day and a half, whatever it is, then she'll do a hefsek tahara. That hefsek tahara, she'll start the haflogas counting from then, the next hafloga. Yeah, there'll be a very short hafloga beforehand because she was mafsik the tahara on the night before. There'll be exactly 5 days between. So she saw a new flow on the 5th day, so she has a hafloga of 9 ninas. Comes and then she'll have 9 ninas afterwards, but she'll stop. Then she'll start the 7 days. She'll mark on the calendar that next hefsek tahara for the purpose of haflaga. So it is shaykh to have a hefsek tahara after 1 day or 2 days. I'm sure you know that. Okay.
Why aren't Tikas done every day?
Uh-huh.
Why aren't Tikas done every day? So even if 4 or 5 days, well, it stops, you have to find
Really?
Well, if it stops in 4 or 5 days, you should do a flood tonight.
Means to count when. Technically, if a woman would have checked after a small period, maybe she would have to do haflaga counts based on that. Yeah. But Poil we don't check because the periods always last longer than that. The only time when that would be a question when a woman has a very small period and she does a b'dika, and we count the b'dika as vodka be'oimek, with all the conditions, and then it becomes marked like a flow, because Argisha, she was a bdika, and she saw blood, Shem Argisha. Then, if she does, then technically speaking, if she stops the bleeding, you'd have the haflaga cheshbon will be different. Yeah.
Could you explain how adding the din of ziva gets rid of the din of minus?
It doesn't get rid of it. It says today, Amo, when the woman knew the difference between nida and zava. So then they said, then she would count. She only has to count 7 days. To go to mikveh at the end of the 7 days. That's when we said the mayim pasuach. Today that we converted every nida into a zava. So even though the zava doesn't have din vestus, there's no vestus by zava. There's only vestus by nida. We took the nidas, we made them into zavas, and we added on top of them the din of vestus. But we didn't add the din that a flow has to have a minimum of 7 days. Right.
So like when did we get rid of, I mean, at a certain point, the animus aren't there in the still?
She's anyways not going to be with her husband.
Huh?
She's anyways not going to be with her husband.
Right, but that's a practical thing.
So that's so we're looking. So the whole thing is a practical thing, because if you know for sure it's nida.
The din of mayim pasuach is not a din; it's a cs.
Yeah. So that's so the haflagi says even though really you should have had to wait 7 days from the beginning of the flow, really you would have to. And because we applied to them today, we converted them to zava, so we don't look at them as mayim pasuach for all the 7 days. That's how the simple understanding of the Alter Rebbe is. However, you could look at it differently. Maybe the Alter Rebbe is not talking about the concept of mayim pasuach. Alter Rebbe is talking about how long does the blood accumulate. Haflaga is how long is your body preparing to. When are you not bleeding? When your body is generating blood. So whichever amount of oinus you're generating blood, that's the amount of oinus that you count. Nothing to do with the halachic definition of mayim sasum or mayim pasuach. The halachic definition of mayim sasum mayim pasuach continue, but the practical amount of time that the flow is closed is that amount of time. That is Alter Rebbe in Sifkot and Chavbeis. We have a Kuntasachrin. Sifkot and Dalet. Kuntasachrin Dalet, he explains on the Kevon Shaflaga, the Alter Rebbe says that you have the Aflaga is you count from end to beginning, rather than from beginning to beginning. And it has to do with the calculation of how many from when it closes until when it reopens. So he says, "V'kevon shafloga chulu ye'ayin teisus v'vakame dafam zayin sefer mitbeis b'teres abayis orech u'b'dekabayis mishmes abayis the hafloga damyo l'seirugin deshvorim." The idea of hafloga is similar to the idea of how to determine a shoir nagoch. If a shoir sees a shoir and gores it, sees a shoir, doesn't gore it, sees a shoir, gores it, sees a shoir, two shvar, doesn't gore them, sees another shoir. You don't have a proper, you can't make a proper sirugin. Yeah, you have to have the same amount, the same gap between them. Means you look not at how many times the ox gored, but how many oxen the ox didn't gore in between. Therefore, v'im kein tzrichim liyos seirugim shavim. Yeah, so he says over there, we would think that it has to do the same way as according to the Tosfos and the Teres Abayis and Beit Kabayis, Haflaga looks like Shvarim, really should have been Sirugin, Shavim. You have to see it how long the gaps are. This because the same amount of time, which means we would have to know how long between the times, just like an ox gourd, how long is it between the time that she sees, not how long is it the time that she doesn't see. How can you compare Shvarim to a woman? By a woman, the idea is to know when she will bleed. By an ox, the idea is to know if he's going to gore or not gore. So by an ox, the idea is to determine if it gores or it doesn't gore. By bleeding, the idea is to determine when you will start bleeding. So why are we looking at the amount of time that, it's not quite comparable. Yeah, but even though it's not quite comparable, ultimately, being that it's taka compared to it, that's why to be able to make a kavua, you have to have 3 serugin shovim, 3 equal gaps. So if it's 42 oinus, 42 oinus, 42 oinus. So 40 oinus, 40 oinus, 40 oinus. I'm not getting into now about when the flagus get lower or get higher at the equal interval, or they go 40, 38, 40, 38. Those are all different. That's when the vestas become more complicated. We can get to much later in Shulchan Aruch. Mistimas lashon haTorah v'Shulchan Aruch ein raya. The words of the Shulchan Aruch, where it says in later on in Kuf Peites in Seif Beis. So I'll read you exactly the lashon. That it says about Kuf Peites, it says im yesh lo vesas kavua l'zman yadua michaf l'chaf michafei l'chafei chashesh zman yadua. You would think that being it mentions chaf l'chaf, chafei l'chafei, whatever it is, that would be l'chayra raya that you go after Tchilas Riyah and after Sefer. It's all this is no mistake. Lashon Torah Shulchan Aruch ein raya. No raya. You go after the beginning. Sharei lashon Haramban behalachos ugam lashon Torah Shulchan Aruch, because the Ramban who discusses this also uses the same lashon as the Shulchan Aruch. And the same Ramban who says milamed lelamed. So you would, if you want to be medayik, that when someone says milamed lelamed, it means mitchilas re'ir, tchilas re'ir. The Ramban says milamed lelamed. And it's clear that Ramban doesn't hold that that you go only with Chilas Shiur, because the Ramban says if she sees a period a few days in a row, every day is its own independent vessels. That's what the Ramban holds. We don't pass like the Ramban, but that's what it is. Shekol yom vessel b'fnei atzmihu. V'im kem pshita d'wadin minyan haflaga she'en shalayom t'feilim l'rishon. So it's clear that the same thing would apply regarding counting the haflagas, that each day is its own independent day, and you don't say, we go based on the first one. So, even though it's the Ramban wrote milamed lelamed, it's clear that he's not referring to the calculations of Haflaga, rather he's referring to the beginning, rather he's referring to whenever it is, he's describing the scenario of Vesas Kavua, but he's not talking about how to calculate Haflagas, and you can't bring a raya that Haflaga has to be calculated from Tchilas Riyah to Tchilas Riyah. Because the Ramban uses that lashon, he clearly does not hold that you only follow the beginning of it. Ela filo Rashba, even the Rashba disagrees with the Ramban, and he holds that you only chayshish for the first aina, even though she says 3 days, which is what the halacha is paskin and Shulchan Aruch also, that you only go to the ikari and the Tosefos. Lo nechlak olav ela mishum debistalek al ikar chul. The Rashba and the Ramban are only arguing on the concept whether we say nistalek al ikar or we don't say nistalek al ikar, nistalek al tafel. According to the Rashba, we say it's one it's a period. Nistalek ha'ikar, nistalek ha'tafel. Once the beginning passes clear, then we ignore the rest of it. V'loi b'sheloi nistalek. But if it's loy nistalek, if it didn't pass the ikar, that means there should be nistalek ikar. When does it apply? It applies when you're calculating. The nistalek ikar applies when we're talking about oynas prisha. When do we say that she's clear? So then we say nistalek ikar. If the ikar cleared, passed through clear, then the tesef is also passed through clear. But when you're talking about haflagas, there's no nistalek ikar. She's still seeing blood. So you can't say we're only going to look at the first ayna. The blood is still there. How can you say that you only look at the first ayna? The whole concept of stalak ikar and stalak tafel means that if the ikar never came, the tafel is not the tesef is not coming either. But over here, the ikar is here. If the ikar is here, the whole thing is counted into it. Even according to the Rashba, the re'iyah as a whole is all considered, is all part of this calculation.
Why don't I say something for regular and other things?
So again, say what?
Because why don't I say something for because of finish as well?
What?
Saying the nervous saying the socket. And we say that after the beginning, you're actually seeing blood, right?
Yeah.
So how can you start counting?
Vesas HaChodesh is for. Yeah, let me explain. Just I think there's a point where it's missing. The calculating of the vestis is to know when the blood is supposed to come. Then there's a few parts. There's calculating to determine when the blood is supposed to come. There's when are you supposed to do the bedika, if it passes without blood coming. Yeah, those are really two things. How do you calculate to know when it is, and when do you do the bedika? How to calculate? It depends on how you look at the period. What you want to know is you want to find a pattern. Everything in the world is somewhat of a pattern. You want to find a pattern. Sometimes you could find a cause, which relieves you from the pattern, which makes something more randomized. But you want to get a pattern. Vesas Gavul is a pattern. Before there were chemicals and then pollution and everything else, people had the Vesas Gavul. It was much easier. Most women had Vesas Gavul. So they had a pattern. You knew the pattern. You determined the pattern. You knew when to expect the blood. And you knew Cheskes Erech was Mani Blood is going to come on time and Vaita Gefar. The question is, how do you determine this pattern? So Chacham will give you a bunch of options how to determine the pattern. You could determine the pattern. Maybe your body goes based on oinus, according to oinus between oinus when the blood is accumulating. Could be this woman's body needs 21 days of collecting blood. To be able to, her uterus lining needs 21 days to shed, until it sheds. 20 days pass, it's not ready to shed yet. 22 days pass, something happened. Maybe she's pregnant, maybe she's sick, we don't know. But her body needs 21 days for the uterus to shed. That's what's the aphlagah. Pointed out to them. Some women, their vestas are based on the moon. The body sees the moon 28 times. Yeah, sees the sun 28 times. And the body, that's what it needs between each period. Another way of calculating. Or has to do with the day of the month. Could be that it has to do with where the moon is in the cycle of the moon. Not the amount of days, but the cycle of the moon. That when the moon starts waning, it's waxing and waning. The moon grows and shrinks. So 2 days into 2 days into waning, that's when she sees blood. So you go based on the Chacham gave you different ways how to calculate. And the Chacham also added the patterns don't have to be the same exact number. It could be in a shrinking. 28, 27, 26, 28, 27, 28, 27, 28, 27. As long as there's a pattern, we know when to be chayshish. So the explanation is when it comes to Vesach Chodesh, the idea is not to do with when she's clean. The idea is when is the body go? Maybe your body is dependent on the time of the month, and that's when it releases them. But when you're looking at Vesas Aflaga, because the concept of Vesas Aflaga is when is the body ready with enough blood to release the blood out, like the Rabbi explained. Therefore, you have to look from Vesas Aflaga, the beginning of Aflaga. It's intertwined. You can't separate them. The reason the Haflaga is, the Haflaga means how long she's not seeing blood, which means how long is the body collecting blood. So B'mela, you have to count only the days. There's no blood. It's a circle. Whichever way you look at it, from both ways, they're interconnected. Therefore, the Ramban explained this. Therefore, the Ramban says this concept in halachas of oina beinis and not in aflaga. Very important point. Milamed Lamed in the beginning. The Lashon Ramban that he says, the Lashon Ramban is kamo hi oino lamed yom itchil asiri acheres sherei v'noshim kach en reis milamed Lamed. The Ramban said it gabe oina beinis. The Ramban did not use this Lashon Milamed Lamed regarding Vesas Aflaga. Lashmuinon dehacha dafka mechashu mitchil asriya. That only in Oina Beinanis we calculate from Tchil Asriya to the beginning of the next 3 years. And the reason is the time of an imukayimo. It's not like Vesas Aflaga. The time of a Vesas Aflaga we calculate from end to beginning. Now today was just explaining that even the Rishonim, there's no machlekes, Sakran to Ramban, Sakran to Rashba, you would have to calculate the Vesas Aflaga from end to beginning. The time of an imukayimo, and the reason why a Vesas Aflaga is different than Oina Beinanis, Mishum the Gemara, Amrin on Gab Oina Beinanis, Vekamo Omar Chulu Shloishim V'Rav Chulu. The Gemara, when it discusses Oina Beinanis, it says, how long is it, whether it's 30 days or 23 days, and the Gemara over there says, Zumar Kachoshiv Yemei Tahara Levad. One opinion says 23 days. Why is that? Why does he count 23 days? And the other one that says 30 days, and the Gemara is talking about the Tumah v'Tahara, 7 plus 23 is 30. So they're discussing on the Bainis. Over there, the concept is you go on exactly 30 days. There's no argument between the one that says 23 and the one that says 30. The one that says 23 is only counting the days between the Nida 7 days, and then 23. So he says only 23. The other one says 7. 7 plus 23 is 30. According to this, is clear. The Kolel alma mechashvinan kol zayin yimei nidosa betuma af alpi shelo yirasa bekulan dim lekem pligi adoli. From there in the Gemara, we see that both opinions, whether the one that says 23 or the one that says 30, both of them consider the first 7 days as completely bleeding. Yeah? Even though she didn't see blood, could be she only saw blood for 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, still in all, the one that says 23 is because he counts all the 7 as Tumah. The one that says 30 is because he counts all the 7 as Tumah plus the 23, but he puts them all together. That's why he says 30, but he means the same thing. Because if not, if you're going to say that it doesn't go based on that, when it comes to Oina Beinis, they would argue on each other. And same thing when it comes to the din. That's how it is, that all 7 days are equal. Because she's anyways Talmud, she's not going to be with her husband. Then V'gamayona Pasuach Kol Zayin, and she has a mind Pasuach all 7 days. Therefore, she cannot be Kavei Aveses during that time. So now,
Why would I thought she should be
if she stopped after 3 days, maybe she should be Kavei Aveses then. She saw shorter vessels.
No.
So, so over here, both opinions is all seven. When it comes to nida, all seven are the same. Umishum hachi, and therefore, ein tzarich bdika leida versus haflaga. She does not have to make a bdika to know when versus haflaga would be. Means technically, if it will be according to nida, we know it's 7 days. She doesn't need a bdika to know when versus haflaga starts, because you know how to calculate versus haflaga from the end of the 7 days to the beginning of the next period. Dein haflaga matcheles ben nidasa l'misav zayin yimei nidasa. Sheshuvin hamayim pasuach. Because when would you calculate that flogger? From the end of the 7 days of Yemei Nideh until that point her mayon is sasum, it's no longer open, and you start the Yemei Tahara. Vasi Shapir. The loy kosher midim ashkoz karse placey simen kuf peites labach lashach v'dok. We'll get to that different. V'afal idna shesh lam din zavis. So now this is all talking about we said that the verses haflaga you calculate from end to beginning. In the Bainis you calculate from beginning to beginning. The Ramban, who discusses Tchila is talking about in the Bainis dafka, not about verses haflaga. But verses haflaga really supposed to be calculated based on the amount of time that there is no bleeding. So he says, we would count, if it will be according to Nida, we would have to count 7 days, not 5 days. And today, when they have din zavos, really that we say that it's din zavos and not din Nida, we made everybody into zavos. So when would you have to do in the bain in this? According to logic, once we converted them from nidus to zavas and we don't look at 7, she would have to do in the bain in this. She have to be calculated based on the hefsek, not based on the time when she saw, not based on 7 plus 23. Yeah, he says v'oy da'af v'mei nida koivim verses oidno v'lema chaskin le b'mayim pasuach. And also today, even during the Yemei Nida, we are Kevei Avesis, and we don't consider that she has the first 7 days Mayim Pasuach, and therefore she can't be Kevei Avesis. Well, the Inyan Vesis Haflaga, and regarding a Vesis Haflaga, when a woman sees in the middle of the Haflaga, and then she sees, let's say she sees 20 days and she sees 10 days, and then Moinin Miriya Sheinis, ein crazy place, so he says we have he says when it says in Indian verses haflaga, you would also we also count if there'll be a shorter haflaga in the middle of the bigger haflaga, you would count both. You would also count the second one. She is keveya in the middle.
So like you count.
So we say that we don't have mitzad echad. She doesn't have a din of zol, but just kaveh verses. Mitzad sheni, she doesn't have a din of nida because she is not doing 7 days.
What are they saying? You would think that you could be kaveya, but in the beginning also from the end of that. What I didn't understand what they're saying about.
You want to calculate. Oin Bainis means the average that all the most of the women see, right? So why do we do 30 days for Oin Bainis? You could have thought, you could have calculated, would have made sense now to say that you do Oin Bainis, you have to do based on average from hefsek tahara to bleeding, not.
Why not? What type are we doing?
So that's what he says then. He says, regarding the majority of women, which is regarding the Bainis, which is the versus the majority of the women, they see from 30 to 30 is not shaykh to make a differentiation.
Before designing young.
Yeah.
Over this, I know is that they have to have
7 days, and that was it. And then 23 clean ones.
Why we're not counting the oil from earlier, from the end of the year. That doesn't explain. why.
No, it doesn't explain it. Okay, I don't think I have to do Mamshech tomorrow. It's already in Seder.